Welcome everyone. Welcome to this special webinar event in collaboration with Jonah and Fullscript. I'm Amy Regan from Fullscript, and I'm so glad that you've joined us today. A few housekeeping notes. Please place all questions you have in the Q&A box for a chance for them to be answered during the presentation. Also, please chime in and answer the polls throughout the presentation as well, because we'd love to get to know you. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent via email to all attendees and registrants. Today, we are so excited. We are joined by Leo Grady, Dr. Jeff Glad, and Dr. Alex Keller. Welcome, everyone, to the webinar.
Amy, thanks a bunch. Welcome, everybody. I just wanted to open by sort of sharing the excitement that we have in partnering with Jonah, having it available in the Emerson catalog for practitioners. If there's any practitioners who are like me, I mean, historically, I typically have thought of microbiome testing around, finding a pathogen for a patient. But I think now as microbiome testing has developed, now I'm seeing more healthy patients come in wanting to be proactive and optimally preventative. And I'm now sort of getting the request to look at diversity and optimizing the microbiome while also considering concerning pathogens that may be there. I think the other aspect of Jonah that's really exciting is the AI piece, which can still be a little bit, we can be hesitant with. But what you'll hear from Leo, who's developed this technology and developed this test, AI has been around for a long time. It's been around in healthcare for a long time. So to have his pedigree come to us in terms of optimizing the microbiome, in terms of assessment and coming up with practical, applicable pathways for patients to improve their health, that's what makes us so excited. So I want to hand off the presentation to Leo to take it from here. And thanks for tuning in.
Thank you so much, Dr. Glad. So just as a disclaimer, this is intended for education and not meant to provide medical or professional advice. And as Dr. Glad mentioned, I've been in AI for a long time. I did my PhD in AI 20 years ago. And I spent the first part of my career at Siemens building AI in radiology. And then I was at a company called HeartFlow building AI in cardiology. This was the first Medicare reimbursement for an AI product in healthcare at HeartFlow. And then I was CEO of Page AI, which was a spin out of Memorial Sloan Kettering, building AI in cancer care and pathology, where we had the first FDA approval for an AI system in pathology. And in all of these disciplines, AI was taking very complex data and helping doctors make sense of it to improve care. But I think nothing compares to the kind of data that we see with the gut microbiome and the amount of data that's available there that can really help us understand what's going on with the patient's health and ultimately make changes to it. So for the agenda today, we're going to start off by talking about why microbiome testing, and then microbiome science, dive into how we can decode the gut microbiome with AI, and then how to leverage Jonah in your clinical practice. So why microbiome testing? It really comes down to root cause medicine. So many of the root causes that are associated with somebody's health are impacted by the microbiome. Obviously, gut dysbiosis is impacted by the microbiome. However, the microbiome is also very important in driving inflammation or managing inflammation. Obviously, infectious organisms, nutrition, mold, mycotoxins, parasites, all of these are related to the gut microbiome. So when we think about trying to identify root causes, the microbiome is really one of the central pillars of trying to identify those root causes in a person's health. So in addition, consumers are really paying attention to the gut microbiome and to gut health more than ever before. 48% of consumers take a probiotic daily or almost daily. You see systems like, or you see media like this Hack Your Health special on Netflix. You see TikToks, Nature articles, consumer goods with probiotics. And there's just a lot out there in gut health and the microbiome and probiotics these days that people are really paying attention to and asking about. And consumers are even buying their own microbiome tests, but they're really confused. These are a couple snapshots of a Reddit thread where people are posting test results and saying that they're confused, they don't understand how to interpret these. And how could they? It's really just a long list of organisms and saying somebody's high or low. Or as Dr. Glad mentioned, pathogen tests that may flag a pathogen, but when there's no pathogen, it's hard to know how to interpret these results or how it relates to someone's health. Now, there are three types of clients that benefit from a microbiome analysis. We have individuals with health issues that are looking for root causes and how to fix them. There are people who are well and who want to stay well. And then there are also health optimizers, athletes, biohackers that are really trying to take their health to the next level, or even people that are using gut health to improve skin health and really in the beauty and health spa arena as well. From a professional standpoint, microbiome testing is for health professionals who are looking for answers and solutions for their clients. Everything from this root cause analysis that we've been discussing, expediting an elimination diet rather than trial and error, really going to the end state for someone, as well as producing personalized action plans, and also, sorry, I think I have a little trouble controlling the slides here. So ultimately, your clients are asking for it and expecting their providers to understand the microbiome. So now let's talk a little bit more about microbiome science and what's known today. Excitingly, the gut microbiome has been linked to nearly every health condition in the body. We have the microbiome has been linked with GI disease, Crohn's, colitis, IBS. The microbiome has been linked with metabolic disorders, obesity, diabetes, weight gain. The microbiome has been linked even with Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, mental health, depression and anxiety, autoimmune conditions such as multiple sclerosis and lupus, performance, joint pain, fatigue, endurance, and overtraining. Skin disease has been linked with the gut microbiome, acne, psoriasis, rosacea, eczema. Cardiovascular disease, heart disease, hypertension have been linked with the gut microbiome. And in fact, 80% of your immune cells are in the gut lining, heavily interacting with your microbiome. And 90% of your serotonin, 50% of your dopamine is produced in your gut. And people are paying attention, both in the scientific and clinical community, as well as in the popular press. You see cover after cover of Nature and Science with microbiome-related topics, as well as popular press like Scientific American and The Economist. So let's dive into a few specific examples. So for example, from a metabolic standpoint, the gut microbiome has been linked to glucose response to foods. So there's an interesting study back in 2006. And what these researchers did is they took a group of people and they gave these people the same foods. And they had them wear a glucose monitor. And what they found is that two people could eat the same food. One of them would have a glucose spike to the first food, and the other one would have a glucose spike to the second food. but it's not as though everybody had a glucose spike to the same foods. Everyone was really different in how they responded, even though it was the same food. And when these researchers dug in and tried to figure out why some people had a glucose response to a certain food versus others, what they found is that the primary culprit was the gut microbiome. In other words, based on a person's gut microbiome, you could predict how their body was going to respond to a certain food in terms of blood glucose response. The microbiome has also been linked to obesity and antibiotics. There was a study in Korea where they looked at the amount of antibiotics people had taken over their entire life and cut them into 4 groups of people that had never had antibiotics, all the way to people who had the most antibiotics. And what they found is there was almost a linear correlation in obesity between these groups of people who had had no antibiotics having lowest levels of obesity and people with the most antibiotics having the highest levels. And it really didn't depend on how you measured obesity, whether it was BMI or waist criteria, but there was almost this linear correlation between the amount of antibiotics somebody had had and their risk of obesity. However, when people find these links between the gut microbiome and a disease, for example, type 2 diabetes, it's never a simplistic link. It's never a situation where you have one organism being high or low being related to diabetes. It's always an ecosystem shift. So for example, a diabetic microbiome may have higher, maybe higher in some organisms and lower in other organisms, but it's a complete shift of the ecosystem and not just a single marker that you can look at to say, this is a person who looks like they have diabetes compared to a healthy individual. Similarly, in the case of obesity, it's never a situation where somebody who's obese is just higher or lower in a single organism. It's always an ecosystem shift compared to a healthy or a non-obese individual. And because it's an ecosystem shift, it's very hard to look at somebody's microbiome and say, oh, this person looks like they have an obese phenotype or a diabetic phenotype, because it's not a single organism. It's really a shift across the entire ecosystem. And one of the exciting things about the gut microbiome is that it can be modified. You can modify the microbiome through diet, through exercise and lifestyle, through supplements, and through medications. But once again, these shifts are complex. By changing your diet, you don't just change a single organism, you really create a shift at an ecosystem level. So, for example, this is a study of how different diets shift and make changes in the gut microbiome. So, for example, a vegan diet will reduce certain organisms, increase other organisms compared to a gluten-free diet or a ketogenic diet. And so even though dietary changes allow us to make changes in our gut microbiome, it's never a simple change. It's always, again, it's an ecosystem shift, which makes it hard to figure out how to recommend dietary interventions or supplement interventions for an individual, because you're never going to just change a single organism. The microbiome literature is also confusing. In addition to the complexity of ecosystem shifts and associations with different diseases, you can find very confusing conclusions in the microbiome literature. So, for example, there's been a lot of discussion of akkermansia recently because when we see very low levels of akkermansia, those low levels of akkermansia can be linked to a whole variety of different diseases, such as Crohn's disease in this study. However, if you keep reading the literature, you also find that there are studies that have linked high levels of akkermansia also with disease. In the case of this study, high levels of akkermansia were linked with Parkinson's disease. So it's not as simple as saying akkermansia is good or akkermansia is bad. It seems like really high levels of akkermansia and very low levels of akkermansia can both be bad, but that there's a certain optimal level that seems to be associated with health. And sometimes even within the same disease, you can find these sort of confusing conclusions. For example, the two papers on the left show that underabundance of B. fragilis is linked with Crohn's disease, whereas the two studies on the right show that overabundance of B. fragilis is linked with Crohn's disease. So you have sometimes these contradictory results that you find in the microbiome literature as well. Even worse, the number of studies is increasing exponentially, so that today there are more than 2,000 studies published every single month on the microbiome in PubMed, and nobody can read all of these. So it's overwhelming to be able to try to keep up with the amount of science and the latest research in the microbiome, even as all of these really exciting developments are coming out. So fundamentally, the microbiome is associated with a vast number of symptoms and conditions that can help you find root causes for your clients. However, the microbiome itself is very complex, and the science can also be very challenging.
Should we pause here quickly for a question or two?
Sure.
So Leo, we had one question come in around the different diet types. I think that slide in itself was very interesting, considering the dogma that tends to be surrounding so many of these types of diets, that you could have what's considered a great diet that actually lowers beneficial or seemingly beneficial bacteria. One question we had in particular was, why does the gluten-free diet increase H. pylori?
I'm not sure it's fully understood why all of these shifts happen. As you know, H. pylori is acid loving, and so I think anything that would lower pH level may increase levels of H. pylori. But it's not always fully understood exactly why these different interventions have the ecological shifts that they do. However, these are observational studies that have looked across hundreds or sometimes thousands of different individuals that have made these changes and seen consistent results.
So I think the big point there is what Jonah is able to do is consume all of the studies in aggregate and be able to serve up what the research is saying in real time, and also consume that 2,000 increase per month that otherwise an average human would not be able to keep up with. Is that accurate?
Yeah, even an extraordinary human, I don't think, can keep up with 2,000 studies a month.
Yeah, Leo, there was another question related to that. Is it known the length of time a dietary change will cause that shift? I mean, is it immediate? Is it weeks? Is it months? Do you have a sense from the research how long that takes to make those changes?
Different studies are done at different times, different periods of length. What we see typically is that those changes happen over the course of about 6 weeks in order to really have those sorts of shifts.
Okay, let's keep going.
All right. Now, if you look at microbiome testing today, as Dr. Glad mentioned, most of the time these are PCR tests or pathogen panels where you may be testing for 20 to 30 species in a PCR panel. And it's a fixed number of species, no matter how many organisms may live in your gut. What you're really doing by looking at just a small panel of 20 to 30 species, it's like looking through the keyhole on a door. You may see a very limited window on a person's gut microbiome. However, it's a very narrow window in the scope of all the different organisms and that the entire complexity of that gut microbiome ecosystem. And one of the other aspects of these PCR panels is that there's no analysis of how those relate to all these different conditions, diabetes or Crohn's disease or Parkinson's, and there's no way that these PCR tests are helping you actually take action in terms of changing these organisms to increase or decrease H. pylori, for example. So these PCR panels, they require manual interpretation, oftentimes many hours of training and long reference manuals to help you interpret. But really, it's this tiny keyhole of a window into the person's gut microbiome. And there's a missing connection to all of the published science on the microbiome, both from the standpoint of connecting to different conditions and symptoms, but as well as how to take action and change them. So there's another way, though, which is to do DNA sequencing, to do shotgun metagenomic sequencing of the person's gut microbiome. And when you do shotgun sequencing, you're no longer looking through the keyhole. You're really identifying all of the organisms that live in a person's gut, all of the bacteria, all of the fungus, the viruses, the protists, the archaea, everything that's in there down to a strain level if you do deep shotgun sequencing. So it's like opening the door and now having 10 times the amount of information as you have with a PCR panel. However, that level of additional information can be further overwhelming to a practitioner that's left on their own to just sift through hundreds and hundreds of different species. And so with this longer list of organisms, how do you interpret a list of 300 plus organisms? And really, we believe that AI is the only way to interpret that much data, because it's not only this list of hundreds of different organisms, but it's the amount of each one of those hundreds of organisms that's really giving you a picture on the root causes of an individual's health. Furthermore, AI can read those 2,000 studies every month and connect you to the optimal interpretation so that you can take advantage of all that latest science and how you can look at the picture of a person's gut and really take advantage of that latest science to not only connect the person's microbiome to their health, but how to change it as well. So, although the gut microbiome is complex to interpret, it's modifiable with diet, lifestyle, and supplement changes.
Leo, quick pause for a couple of questions. This is an interesting one because I know you have interest in this topic because you and I have spoken about this a number of times. The question is, given the explosive growth of GLP-1s for type 2 diabetes and obesity, does your test have any predictive value regarding the potential efficacy of these medications?
The answer is yes. Yes and no. So there are a number of studies that have shown that certain microbiome configurations are predictive of efficacy of a GLP-1. In fact, 1 out of 3 individuals don't respond well to GLP-1s or don't have a really effective response. And there have been several studies that have shown by looking at somebody's microbiome pre-treatment, you can effectively predict who will respond and who won't respond. And our AI has read those studies, can make those predictions. You will not find those answers on the reports today. For the moment, we're still discussing with our legal team on releasing those results. However, we are open for collaboration on this with anyone who has an interest in that topic.
Super. We have one more question here. Rather than just asking it directly, I'm going to ask it more broadly. You're alluding to the fact that with the combined knowledge of an individual's microbiome, that you can make changes to that with certain types of interventions, diet, lifestyle, otherwise. Are you able to, or is the AI able to pinpoint when a specific person has an imbalance, how to address that imbalance specific to their microbiome?
Yes.
So one particular strain that's out of balance, that's causing symptoms, the AI knows how to accommodate that based on the individual's overall microbiome profile?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the way that, and we're going to get to this a little bit later, the way that works is because we know, for example, how a vegan diet shifts your microbiome. We know how a gluten-free diet shifts your microbiome, or a fat-free diet, or we know how vitamin C or vitamin K or all these different interventions that have been studied, we know how each one of them shifts your microbiome. And so once we analyze your microbiome with sequencing, we're able to create effectively a digital twin of your microbiome and apply these interventions virtually to you. So we can say, what do you look like, or what would you look like if you went vegan? What would you look like if you took these supplements? What would you look like if you had more cardiovascular exercise? Whatever it is that's been shown to shift your microbiome, we can apply all those interventions virtually and then see for you which set of interventions are going to help change your microbiome in the way that you want to, in order to reduce these imbalances and reduce these associations with different diseases.
I think that's, again, one of the compelling offerings here of Jonah, is the ability to have a digital twin and essentially simulate what would happen if you apply an intervention. Typically, if there is research associated to these kinds of results, it's based on a certain subtype of the population, and that doesn't necessarily apply to an individual. So we'll see the version of that later in the demo. We'll move on here. I know there's more questions coming in. We'll try to address as many as we can as we get to the end. But just to keep the flow going, why don't you keep on going here, Leo?
All right, let's keep going. So where we last left off is asking whether AI can help interpret a microbiome test. And, with in the last year or so, people think of AI as ChatGPT, and you might ask, well, maybe I can just take, these 500 organisms that come out of Shotgun and feed it into ChatGPT and say, what does this mean for the person's health and how do I fix it? Unfortunately, that's not going to work. So if we keep going with these slides, what we see is that just putting a person's microbiome test into ChatGPT won't get you the answers you're looking for. ChatGPT doesn't know normal ranges of different organisms for a population. It doesn't know how to operationalize the study results to interpret a person's microbiome test or to resolve these contradictions. And then also importantly, ChatGPT will hallucinate or make things up. And so unfortunately, just using a generic AI system like ChatGPT or any of the others really is not now and not ever going to be able, it's not really suited for interpreting a microbiome test in the context of existing science. And so for that reason, if we go to the next slide, we had to build a custom system at Jonah that is really focused on the microbiome literature to help us interpret a microbiome test in the context of the latest science. And so with Jonah, this AI only reads the relevant studies, peer-reviewed studies, credible journals, studies on human subjects with stool samples that were collected, in vivo, sequenced, subjects age 5 and older, and so on. All of the studies that the AI reads, the AI gives it a quality score based on the study size and the journal quality. And the AI also will resolve study contradictions by more or less adding up all of the evidence in different sides of an issue and weighting those those levels of evidence by the quality of the study. So if you have two contradictory studies, one of them is a huge study in the New England Journal of Medicine, the other one's a small study in second-tier journal, even though they're contradictory, the New England Journal study is going to carry a lot more weight than the other one in the interpretation. We also have quality control to make sure that the AI is extracting the information correctly from all of these studies. And then Jonah is able to use this digital twin to apply virtual interventions to assess the efficacy of different interventions. So what does that look like? So, so we are assessing these signatures to conditions and symptoms. So what that means is that we compare the client's microbiome to every study that's ever been published. So we can say, for you, based on your personal microbiome, or based on your client's personal microbiome, your microbiome fits the profile of abdominal cramps or of irritable bowel syndrome or Crohn's disease or every condition that's been cited in the literature. And then we create this virtual post-intervention microbiome using all of the interventional studies on diet, lifestyle, supplements. We also look at medications, but again, that's not present on the current report, just for legal reasons at the moment. And then based on those analysis of those virtual interventions, able to pull together a recommendation of an action plan to lower the associations, to change the person's personal microbiome in a way that is really custom to them and personalized to them and the goals they're trying to achieve and the specific imbalances that they're trying to resolve. So let's see if I can actually show you a case study based on, all right. Are you able to see this? Okay.
We can.
So this was a case study of an individual, a woman who was she presented with a number of GI issues, abdominal pain. She was having sort of irregular movements, bowel movements. She was having hair loss issues, and really she was looking for answers and root causes. So this was a study that was done with one of our partners, and what they found, it starts with this high level overview. So you see her microbiome diversity, average, so nothing concerning from a diversity standpoint. There were 0 pathogens found. If there were pathogens, you'd be able to see more here. But then we can dive into how her microbiome affects the patient on multiple levels. So really broken into 5 different groups. The impact of her microbiome on her GI health, her skin health, her brain health, her metabolic health, and her physical performance. And you see each one of these is color-coded, red, green, or yellow, depending on how, how her microbiome looks related to those areas. So if we dive in, for example, on GI health, we see that her microbiome is not well suited for processing lactose. So lactose could give her issues. We see that her microbiome was strongly linked with signatures for gas and for irritable bowel syndrome, as well as high association with bloating and some with acid reflux and lower with abdominal pain and diarrhea. You also can see that the different negative associations here, we didn't find any signature linked to celiac or Crohn's or leaky gut. With each of these, you can also click in and see why her microbiome was linked with irritable bowel syndrome. So, for example, these are all the organisms that have been linked in her gut that were linked with IBS. You see that she was really high in each of these particular cases. And these were the different studies. There were 42 studies here that were used to link her microbiome to irritable bowel syndrome. For each one of these, you can go link out to PubMed and read the study if you want to. So really, the AI is showing you what the literature says and what the latest science is showing. So if you want to dive deep, you can dive deep. And if you want to see recommended actions specific to the imbalances here with her IBS, you can look at those, or you can just look at this high level of all the different associations that were found with her gut. When it comes to skin health, her microbiome was linked with alopecia, so exactly the sorts of hair loss that she was experiencing. Her microbiome was also linked with chronic hives. And again, with any of these, you can dig in, you see, these are the organisms that have been linked with alopecia, with hair loss. These are the studies linking these organisms with alopecia. But what this is really saying is that when we're digging for root causes on why she's experiencing the hair loss, at least seems that her microbiome is involved in in that phenomenon for her, and it's something that we can change. We can change her microbiome. We can also look at brain health. Her microbiome was linked with depression. It's not something she reported, but it is something that was found in her microbiome. There was a very low association with Parkinson's, as if she were moving in the direction of Parkinson's. So something that she could keep an eye on, but not a very strong association. And then also a strong association with her microbiome and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and a little bit with hyperglycemia. But a lot of the metabolic conditions, there were no signatures found for those. And then physical performance standpoint, a little bit of a link with insomnia, but for the most part, everything looked good here. Now, this is showing the analysis side of her microbiome. But now when we come to using this digital twin, doing the assessment, figuring out what actions are really going to help her, that's when we go into this action plan. And basically, the AI is pulled together by doing this analysis, an action plan that would help fix the imbalances in her microbiome related to all of these areas that she either self-reported or her doctor reported, or that came up with a strong association. And you see, fairly comprehensive list of actions that she can take, and these are rank ordered by how effective they would be in terms of addressing the imbalances that we find here. For each one of these actions, you can click in and you see, for example, for fermented food, these are the different changes that have been shown to be associated with fermented foods in the person's microbiome. In this case, lowering diarrhea, lowering this bifidobacterium strain, and so on. And each of these changes to her microbiome, you see up here, are linked to lowering bloating, gas, depression, or alopecia. And these recommendations are specific examples of fermented foods, although certain fermented foods we still recommend avoiding because, for example, these contain lactose as well. And she had the lactose challenge. And here are the scientific papers that have linked fermented foods to all of these different changes in a person's gut microbiome. Okay. You can also, if you want to ask questions about specific organisms in her gut, you can go to the organisms page. Here you can filter many different ways. You can look at bacteria or fungus or pathogens. You can look at only ones that are present, only ones that are absent, below average, above average. You can look at species level or phylum level. Really, if you want to slice and dice all of the organisms that were found in her microbiome, different ways, you can do that through this, or you could search just for Akkermansia or whatever it is that you want to look for. And for each of these organisms, you see that there's a description. We tell you what her abundance is, what a normal range is, and where she falls, and sort of average, above average, or below average. But really, at the end of the day, what matters is, how her ecosystem is related to these different diseases, and exactly like how you can shift her microbiome and fix these dysbioses. All right.
Leo, I guess we should mention that is a sneak preview of the newest interface for Jonah that's actually only launching next week. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So you guys are the first to see this new interface. So there's a big product upgrade that is launching next week. And so anyone who has tried Jonah before and seen the old product, you're going to be upgraded to this new version next week. And all cases that are ordered from now on are going to have this new interface.
Yeah, I think it's easy to appreciate sort of the root cause nature of the microbiome here, right? I mean, yes, I'm probably considering treating my patient with something specific for alopecia and talking about diet and lifestyle for fatty liver, but to also connect the dots that the root may actually be in the microbiome, it's very clear to show that, to the patient, but also as a practitioner, understanding really, again, that root cause of what's going on.
Yeah, and it's not something that you would easily pick up by looking at a list of organisms, or especially just a list of the PCR organisms in some of the classical tests. You'd never be able to find a signature for alopecia, for example. Even if you did read all of the science, they're just not covering enough of the microbiome. And then, and then trying to put that science to work and make it practical is very difficult without this sort of technology.
Neil, one thing I wanted to call out or question based on seeing the demo like that. So you're pointing out the research that substantiates all the results or the interventions along the way. That is being updated on a regular basis based on how the AI is pulling in new citations that are being published every month. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So you're always able to take advantage of the latest science in analyzing a person's microbiome, a client's microbiome.
Super. I think we're having trouble turning on the deck again. So fortunately, we were more or less at the end. I think the biggest thing that we wanted to make sure is that we walk people through the process of how to order the Jonah kits through the Emerson platform. And then we've got a number of questions that we'll address as well. So Leo, can you give that walkthrough off the top of your head?
Yeah, so you can order through the Emerson Ecologics catalog. And after you place an order, you can order multiple kits to have in your office. You will need to make an account with Jonah to be able to receive those results and ultimately, see the patient results and manage all of your patients. But you can place all of your ordering through Emerson Ecologics catalog.
Super. So just to be clear again, if you order through Emerson, you have to make a Jonah account. And then the other big factor is once you give the kit to a patient, there's a barcode on there that patient has to use so that they're registering the kit as well. There's a little bit of a crisscrossing here that has to happen, but it's quite straightforward once you do it. There's instructions on the Emerson page for Jonah, and there's a link in there as well that you need to complete just to make sure that the two systems are talking to each other.
That's right. And there are also instructions in the kit as well.
Yeah. So if you go to emersonecologics.com and you search Jonah in the search bar, all of those instructions are listed on the product page. You may have to click through the product images, and the second image actually has a full description of everything that you can download if you need to. Okay. So we've got a number of questions here if we want to dive into those.
Let's do it.
All right. Jeff, do you want to start?
Sure. So a couple people were asking a similar type of question. Can Jonah take a raw file from another shotgun test and drive that interpretation?
In theory, yes. We haven't built out that infrastructure to do it so far. If someone has a batch of tests that they want analyzed this way, it's something that we please reach out. We can talk to you about doing that. But we haven't engineered our system, for that use case specifically.
We had a number of people asking about parasites, and that many of the other microbiome tests on the market don't tend to provide a lot of information on parasites. How does Jonah compare?
So Jonah is doing DNA sequencing, and parasites have DNA. So we are measuring all of the DNA in your stool sample. And so if there's evidence of those parasites in your stool sample, then we're extracting that DNA and you can find it in the results.
A question about serial testing. So, does Jonah add sort of follow-up testing and bring that into the database in terms of sort of tracking a patient's journey, say?
Yeah, so if somebody is testing at multiple different time points, say every few months, we are building out the capability of providing that time tracking, similar to like an Oura Ring or something like that, except with more complex data, to be able to help somebody understand not only where they're going from a health standpoint, but how the interventions that they've been working on have affected their microbiome and how they need to make adjustments to those interventions as they go forward.
How would you say microbiome results stack up against genetic results? So when you see that the microbiome leads to maybe a higher risk or likelihood of something like depression, you gave in that example in the demo that the patient actually didn't report depression, but was considered a high risk for depression. Does that automatically mean that she would have depression, or just that it is a high risk? And therefore, if you compare that with genetics, you can counsel the person to say, these are the things that you may be at high risk for, but you're not experiencing yet.
Yeah, I think it's a great analogy, right? So if the patient is experiencing or not experiencing depression, or for example, take Parkinson's disease, right? If somebody is exhibiting no signs of Parkinson's, and yet they have a microbiome signature that's been linked with Parkinson's, I would say this is an area to be vigilant about, and to potentially, if it's something you're worried about, talk to your doctor and do a deeper workup on. But it may be the case that you're just at higher risk, or you're associated with these different conditions. I think but you never develop them. I mean, it's possible. I mean, you could have a BRCA gene, for example, that's high risk for breast cancer, but person could never develop breast cancer, right? I think it's very similar with the microbiome. What's great about the microbiome, though, is that you can change these risk factors by changing your microbiome. So unlike genetics, where you're stuck with it, and if you don't like your genes, you're not going to do anything about it until someday you can CRISPR yourself up. Now you can actually change your microbiome through relatively straightforward interventions, and that really puts a lot more control in the patient and the practitioner to help adjust these risk factors and help steer them away from disease.
So someone could have a microbiome signature for Parkinson's, but not genetic. And you're saying that as a result, genetically, they're not predisposed to developing Parkinson's, so they can manipulate their microbiome and effectively mitigate that risk altogether, is the assumption.
Yeah, I mean, I think what causes what in Parkinson's is not well known. I mean, we do know studies show that, for example, like people who've had the vagus nerve cut are extremely unlikely to develop Parkinson's. And so it does seem that, a lot of early, pathophysiology of Parkinson's may start in the gut and the enteric nervous system and work its way up to the brain. Whether changing your microbiome to move away from a Parkinson's signature will lower your risk or change your risk, I think is unknown entirely right now. However, what we can say is that if we are seeing that signature, people with that Parkinson's signature have been more likely to have Parkinson's. And so it may be a foreshadowing that it's something that you can be more vigilant about and dig deeper into.
So moving to another condition, a specific question about, are there microbiome signatures that are associated with osteoarthritis that the Jonah result would point to?
I have to go check osteoarthritis. I believe that there are microbiome signatures that have been observed for osteoarthritis. It's not one that I've spent a whole lot of time on. If there are signatures that have been linked with osteoarthritis, then the AI will be reading those and you'll be able to find those associations.
There's a follow-up question here from Carolyn regarding parasites, that she was saying you'd have to know the DNA of different parasites. How many parasites do you know the DNA of? Do you happen to have that answer off the top of your head?
Well, the government, the NCBI, maintains a database of every organism that has been sequenced. Every plant, every fly, every parasite, every bacteria. So these databases are public databases that are maintained by the NIH. And therefore, we can reference those in order to identify different strands of DNA that are found in the stool sample. I can't say for certain that every parasite has been sequenced and put in the NCBI database, but an incredible number of organisms across the animal and plant kingdom are there. And I would be surprised if almost all parasites aren't there, given the impact of parasites on human health.
So this question is, there are so many probiotics out there. How do we know which is the right one? Also bringing in prebiotics and symbiotics. Ultimately, I think the answer is this is one of the value props of Jonah, is giving that patient some specificity on which probiotics, which prebiotics, which foods to focus on. And then her follow-up question is, how often would you change these up or reassess to optimize for diversity? So anything to add to that, Leo?
Yeah, so through the shotgun testing and the analysis and the digital twin, we're able to assess which strains you are deficient in that you can buy in commercial probiotics. As a company, we don't make commercial probiotics. We don't vouch for any specific companies. But I know in our own conversations, Dr. Glad, you've told me about how Fullscript has gone through and meticulously vetted all the different supplements that are available through Fullscript. And so I think any of the listeners can probably trust that any of the probiotics, any of the strains that Jonah would recommend that you could buy through Fullscript would be really efficacious formulations that could work for somebody. In terms of how often you would want to change, I think it's going to depend on, not just taking probiotics, but other lifestyle changes, dietary changes, and health changes that happen over time. So, every few months, looking at your microbiome, making adjustments, making tweaks, even if it's 6 months or every year, being able to do that reassessment, I think will help you figure out what's right for you and your body right now.
Gentlemen, I think we're going to have to call it there because we're running out of time here. I did want to mention that if anyone has any follow-up questions, you can either reach out to us at the Fullscript team, or this slide we couldn't show because it didn't show up here, but there's also Jacqueline on your team, Leo, on the Jonah Health team. Her email address, if you want to email her directly, and she was sharing this, so this is not confidential information here. It's Jacqueline, JACLYN .Kawwas, KAWWAS @Jonah.health. So you can reach out to Jacqueline directly. She'll have any answers regarding Jonah Health, or reach out to our team and we can answer them as well.
And I'm also easy to find on LinkedIn, Instagram. Please reach out and be in touch.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody for joining us today, engaging in conversation on this really relevant topic. Everyone take a look out in their email. Early next week, you'll be sent a recording of this event, and reach out to anyone if you have any questions, myself included. My email is amy.regan, that's Amy Regan @fullscript.com. And I just want to say thanks again to everybody for spending their afternoon with us and really diving into this topic. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Leo.
Thanks, Leo. Take care.
Bye, everyone.